This video is by Straight Goods News, SGNews.ca.
This is our first ever national bargaining conference, and we took a recommendation to our 2011 convention in Vancouver, 2,500 CUPE members, our parliament, and in the aftermath of the 2008 global recession and some of what we see going on around the world, we anticipated a much tougher climate for bargaining across the board, and that we should get together. And this turnout is by far the largest CUPE conference ever held in our 50 years. I think people are real interested in learning from one another about bargaining. We think we can do well in bargaining, but we need to recognize what's happening around us in the United States and the European Union, and what's happening to us in Canada, and how can we become stronger out of this. We have a lot of new staff, new members. We have a demographic that's heading into retirement, and to take 3 days and focus on nothing but bargaining and bring in guests from United States, from in Canada, from Europe, we think is value added for our union, and the response seems to be terrific.
Tell me more about the bargaining process. People, I think outside of the labor movement, would think of bargaining as kind of almost an esoteric or dry kind of a subject. Why do 1,000 people want to come to Ottawa and talk about it? What's the crux of this?
Well, number one, we accept that collective bargaining, which is not a perfect science, is the best way for workers to sit down collectively to attach value to their labor and their working conditions. Number two, we know there's incredible pressure to kind of put downward pressure on bargaining with things like two-tier wages, and the country can no longer afford pension plans. Some people argue that way. And we know that to resist that downward pressure, we need to act together at bargaining tables. And number three, we need to prepare for issues that maybe we haven't had to talk about for a while. There hasn't been a pressure in the past to eliminate pension plans. That's happened in the private sector. As the unionization rate in the private sector drops, there's more of a light shone on the public sector. So one of our messages at the conference is, we're here to talk about CUPE bargaining, but we need to support private sector workers and their bargaining, and we need to support the 70% of Canadians who don't have a union to bargain on their behalf. Hence our Canada Pension Plan campaign to expand pensions. And B, we want the option of unionization to be more available to all the workers in Canada who probably need a union badly, given the state of wage increases in Canada.
And there are politicians openly campaigning to take that away.
There's no question that there's an aggressiveness on the right, if you will. It's ironic to me that the global recession was caused by unregulated financiers. They've been able to socialize their losses in the United States and kind of privatize their profits as they recover. And states that were formerly, the birthplace of the American labor movement, Michigan, sit-down strikes in the 30s with the big three automakers. They bring in right-to-work legislation, which is really about defunding the union and ultimately eliminating unions. And I think in 2013 in Canada, more Canadians than ever need unions. This union, CUPE, the largest in Canada, wants to do a good job on behalf of our members on three fronts. One, at their bargaining tables. Two, we want to defend the public services that we provide every day. Canadians want more health care, not less. And three, we want to take our rightful place to support other workers in their struggles, including non-unionized workers, and increasing the unionization rate of the private sector. So all three of those functions, bargaining, defending public services, and having solidarity with other workers, are hallmarks of our union over the last 50 years. I'm astounded that over 1,000 of our members responded, and the locals have paid to send them here. And it tells me that the decision made by our national convention in 2011 was correct. We're in choppy waters, but we're not putting our heads down. We're putting our heads up and to take our union forward.
Your workers are facing, most of your members work municipally, provinces. They're facing fiscal situations that are presented to them as fait accompli. There is no money. We must invoke austerity. How does a municipal worker, a cop, a librarian deal with something that's passed down from a much higher level of government than he or she can deal with?
Well, I think at a local community, provincially and nationally, we confront those who say the race to the bottom is the only way to go. In a province like New Brunswick, there is a problem there when you slash corporate taxes to the lowest rates in Canada, much lower than the United States or the European Union. You slash personal income tax rates and then you plead poverty. And the only thing worse than pleading poverty, in the case of the province of New Brunswick, is to tell the citizens we can't afford health care. I know of no Canadians who accept that proposition. Our parents established a universal, fully accessible healthcare system, and we can't afford not to have it. So it's not in vogue these days to talk about taxation. Much of the world's labor movement is talking about a tax on speculators, a transactions tax on all the speculative nature of the stock market economy. And we haven't made progress on that in Canada, but we want to talk to Canadians about services. We meet no Canadians who want less access to their library, less access to public schools, less access to public health care. People want to see those things expanded, and the race to the bottom, refusals in a recession to talk about revenue, this is the first recession in our modern history where Canadians are being confronted with chopping spending. It didn't work in the 30s. Austerity didn't work, and a new Keynesian approach came from Mr. Mackenzie King and Mr. Roosevelt. Austerity is not working today. Even the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund are saying the global economy is sluggish. Cutting and cutting and cutting isn't stimulating. It's in fact counterproductive. So we don't think that people want to be taxed off the planet, if you will. But in a recession, one must be able to talk about revenues available to government, and as the economy grows, you pay down that debt in an orderly fashion. You use a scalpel, you don't use a axe to cut services. So we will stand up in Canada and defend the integrity of a healthcare system that needs investment. Our cities and towns need investment in infrastructure if we're to attract business. And there's absolutely no way we're going to get into a race to the bottom and say you can shrink yourself to greatness. No jurisdiction in Canada, no government in Canada can shrink itself to greatness. And so we can't just confine ourselves to our bargaining tables. We're here talking about bargaining. We need to also be a social union that enters public debates, and we need to support other workers, union and non-union, and we will.
One last question. Young workers, they seem to be the most marginalized at this point. They graduate with degrees and there's no future for them in Canada. Many of them have to leave. What's the message of this conference for them?
I think the message is the new and young workers coming into CUPE, the doors are open. Come on in and get active. And the new and young workers in Canada, without the benefit of a union, they must come to view the Canadian trade union movement as a viable option for them, as service sector workers or other workers. And I think the image of the labor movement, to be self-critical for a minute, we don't have the luxury of focusing only on our own bargaining tables, as important as that is. We must be relevant to the worker out there who's got 3 jobs trying to pay off their university degree. And I think historically we have been a relevant option for new and young workers. Lots of downward pressure on the trade union movement today. The last thing any union, including CUPE, should be is isolationist. So a lot of our efforts and time goes into CUPE members and our bargaining, but we need to make time for the Canadians who don't have a union and be relevant to them as well. And ultimately, to Canadians who value the services we provide, our library workers tell me Canadians want more access to the internet and to libraries. Our healthcare workers speak with Canadians every day who are frustrated with the healthcare system. And our university workers, over 60,000 people, CUPE members, work in universities. They see students with crippling debt loads who want more, not less, access to post-secondary education. And at a time when there's a kind of demographic heading to retirement, it should be a strong time for labor to extract decent wages and benefits for workers, and that's not happening. CUPE is quite prepared to take our rightful place in the debates of the day in Canada and in the trade union movement in Canada and reach out to those young workers who don't yet have the benefit of a decent job or a union.